committee to order. First item is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. First item is public comment. Katie Rosenberg has contacted me relative to making public comments.
Katie Rosenberg, citizen of Marathon County District 1. I am just here because I read your packet and I saw that you were considering entering PFAS litigation. I read that with interest, including the memo. It was a good memo, thank you for that. And also the brochure. And I guess, I don't know if I'm giving you my support for that. I guess I have some questions. I'm interested probably as the lawsuit enters different phases, because my knowledge of PFAS in this area, it feels like maybe the airport and the aqueous film isn't necessarily the biggest source, but I am interested in the county being able to recover some costs for potential remediation. I heard from your administrator that it's about $1 million a year for transport of the leachate to a separate county for disposal. So that could be something that you consider as you enter other phases of this lawsuit. But anyway, I am here with interest. I might have questions as I listen. There's a little bit of danger in making comment before hearing the presentation. So just thank you for having this conversation.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, that concludes the public comment period. Next is approval of the February 18th minutes. What are your wishes? Moved by Supervisor Lemmer, second by Chair Gibbs to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. And I'd just like to note all members are present. All right, we will move on to item 6A1, approval of the February claims and question costs. We received those on Saturday from the Finance Director, Minsky. What are your wishes? Are there any questions, or what are your wishes? Motion by Supervisor Lemmer to approve the claims and question costs. Is there a second? Second by Vice Chair Marshall. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. All right. Item A2 is consideration to authorize the administration to sublease space. Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is a memo in your packet on page 19 that kind of lays out the background, but in short, the Veteran Service Officer, Mr. Galindo, was approached late last year about an opportunity for, or a request, I should say, from an organization that he works with relatively closely, the Center for Veterans Issues. They were interested in space to better serve individuals within Marathon County and the region. We did some initial work, and after that evaluation, that we found the best place to really do that is our space that we currently lease out at the Community Partners Campus. Our occupancy is such that this would work. So really bringing it to this committee, it's something you want me to do, I'll work with them. We do have a standard lease template that I could easily put in place to address this. I've reached out to the Community Partners Campus to take their temperature on it, and they were supportive. So if it's something this body would be supportive of doing, I would move forward with that. In terms of any revenue we would have from that, I would, as my memo lays out, my thought was to have that deposited into the Veteran Service Commission funds, which VSO Galindo has talked with the board about before, that historically we haven't funded that to continue to have funds go into it. So this would be a nice influx of revenue for that purpose. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Vice Chair Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How long does our lease at the Community Partners Campus go through?
I believe it's through the end of 2029.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, what are your wishes? Supervisor Hart, is that a motion to authorize the administrator to enter into a sublease agreement? Yes. All right, is there a second?
Second.
Was that Supervisor Reynolds or Poole?
Pool.
Poole, okay. Second by Supervisor Poole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of authorization of the sublease will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, we will move on to 6B1. Resolution setting elected official salaries for 2027 through 2030 term. Molly, is that you?
Yes, thank you. So the information regarding this topic starts in your packet on page 21 with a memo. There's a resolution on page 23, and then the presentation I'm going to run through starts on page 25. I will just briefly recap kind of why we're here, the direction that's been given, and then the recommendation and options that I have for you today. So pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 59.22, the board does need to establish the annual salaries, the annual compensation for county elected offices prior to the earliest time for filing nominations. So for the salaries for the 2027 through 2030 term for both the sheriff and the clerk of court do need to be set prior to April 15th, 2026. In January, I was given the direction from this committee to incorporate these elected department heads into the county's compensation structure, consistent with the direction that was given in 2024 when establishing the rates for the 2025 through 2028 term for the treasurer, register of deed, and county clerk. So the process I went through was reviewing and considering the current compensation and classification structure that was implemented on January 4th this year. I reviewed previous compensation structure as to where the placement of these particular elected department heads were relative to other appointed department heads, as well as consideration for internal equity within their departments, positions such as their deputy. And I've reviewed the external market data that's available, specifically what other counties are considering or what they have already done. And I believe that after that review, that the clerk of court should be placed in classification S, the sheriff should be in classification W, and I would like to recommend that these individuals start at step 1 of those respective scales at the beginning of their term and then move through those steps through the remainder of their term. It's my understanding that Administrator Leonard has discussed this placement, these recommendations with both the current clerk of court and sheriff, and they are both supportive of these recommendations being moved forward. As I mentioned, my recommendation is that they be placed on step 1 and then move through those scale. However, I do anticipate year-over-year scale adjustment being necessary to sustain our to remain competitive within the market. So at this time, I believe it would be appropriate that a 1% scale adjustment take place in the first 2 years, but it is really difficult then as we get a little bit further into the future to anticipate over the course of the term, is a 4% adjustment necessary? Is it not? So I did come up with 2 kind of recommendations here for you to consider. One being that 1% increase over each year of that term. Option 2 being a 1% increase for those first 2 years, and then a 0.5% for the remaining years. So in kind of both of these options, like I said, the elected department heads will move through the steps of this scale, but really the question here is, what are we anticipating in terms of scale adjustment to remain market competitive? That is something that we anticipate the scale to do. That said, those adjustments will be established each year based on cost of living, market condition, things of that nature. So we're really just trying to take our best guess here as to what is going to be the most appropriate. As I mentioned, there are two options, and I have outlined in the materials kind of what the financial impact is of each of those decisions and what the overall cost. So the difference in the term, the difference between the options, and I'd like to open it up if there are any questions about the process or the options that have been laid out.
Are there any questions for Molly? If not, the question is do we accept the recommendation from our HR director? And then if we do, which one? Is it the 1% per year increase in the step, or 1% for 2 years and 0.5% for the final 2 years, in addition to the step?
The year-over-year impact of that, I'll just kind of share, and you can see it here in the slides for these elected department heads as they move through the scale. The year-over-year difference in those second 2 years, it's really, is it a 3.5% year-over-year increase, or is it a 3% increase? Just to kind of help frame really what that means. And then there's also a slide that actually kind of just outlines it in like kind of a term total, so you can see what that overall package would look like over those 4 years.
Any questions, or what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will make a motion to accept the recommendations and use option 2, which is a 1% increase for the first 2 years and a 0.5% increase over the last 2 years, and understanding that it also includes a step increase each of those years.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion on that motion? Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a HR question. Is there any advantages or disadvantages to either option?
Well, option 2 is cheaper, but from an HR perspective, really, it's, again, like I said, we are taking our best guess as what's going to happen to the scale as a whole. Ideally, with this model, this is going to make future discussions of this nature easier. We incorporated the elected department heads into the last term. Their term is going to be coming due. I would like to continue to follow suit, continue to have these elected department heads remain at their classification, start at the step of that scale, move through those scales, and then essentially start over. And so the way that this is outlined will allow for just this to be a smoother process moving forward. All that said, where the scale is truly at the end of this term or the beginning of the next term for that other set of elected department heads is going to be determined by the overall scale movement that gets approved, like I said, each year as we look at cost of living and then, market conditions and things of that nature. So I unfortunately don't have that crystal ball to say, hey, I think this one is better or that one is better, because I don't know what is going to happen, but I know that movement will happen. And so which way do you want to play it, I guess?
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I think the one thing that option 2 does is provides, if the inflation factor is not quite so high in year 3 and 4, it brings it back to 3% increase each year versus a 3.5% increase for those final 2 years. Obviously, the next term would be there'll be a reset and an adjustment at that point.
Any other questions? That will go to a vote. All those in favor of the recommended salaries for the clerk courts and the sheriff will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. So then we'll update the resolution for the county board packet with the last 2 years that were blank.
All right, the next item is new highway facility update and consideration of a resolution authorizing moving into the next construction phase. Chris.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. This presentation begins on page 41. There isn't the infrastructure agenda memo is included because it didn't have some of the detail that's in the one to this committee, just based on the timing of when we received the information. But the agenda memo does go into a little more detail on some of the questions and what's going on. Overall, the presentation is meant to sort of hop, skip, and jump through that, but I know I'm well known for lengthy hops and skips and jumps, so I'll do my best to speed right along so we can get to your questions. Everybody knows me, Chris Holman. Just so you know, the County Board Educational meeting will have a presentation on this for the board. Troy Torgerson will be leading that discussion. I'll be remote from facilities. He's the project planner and lead on the project. And then the highway commissioner will be there. Tyler Banky, I've listed him here because it's also important to note that throughout the process, we've gone out of our way to make sure, and Kevin's done a great job of this, of getting his staff involved in the process and looking at the plans to see like how is that space going to work for them. They had some really good, robust discussions on that a month or so ago. And the project team, the architect Ned Dirksen from Excel Engineering, as well as Eric Brandt from Myron Construction will be here so that they can dig into the weeds from their perspectives with the questions that come up. For the site plan overview, the county and the village of Croninwetter, we've discussed the overall site areas around it in some depth. We've gone through there with them to make sure we understand what their processes are for the site plan approval process and just some of their ordinances and requirements for driveways and things like that, what the facades of the buildings should look like. And we'll get even more into depth with that with them as the design comes into focus. The site's plan orientation and layout has shifted quite a bit. Again, that's referencing back to the staff's input, but also thinking about the municipalities that the highway department works with, the public who would come to the facility, but also the community in general. And as part of that, we were able to tour multiple county highway facilities across the state, most of them pretty recent. So ideas and learning from their experiences, those tours were very beneficial in terms of learning from that and taking from what we saw to plug into what would work for us. The general overall like overhead site, and I put some red circles around it just because the coloring is a little, things blend in. The main red circle here in the middle is just where the main building would be laid out, and we'll get into a little more detail of the interior of those buildings here in a minute. And then there's the salt storage facility up here in this corner, and then down in the bottom right, you've got the proposed equipment storage, which includes heated and unheated, as well as the shaded areas kind of on the top and bottom of the square. Those are lean-tos that pitch out from the building to provide additional covered storage. The gray areas around this are mostly related to stormwater and handling the issues with that. And we've been doing a lot of work with the village for stormwater controls as well. There's a lot of areas where this project may overlap with things that they also need to do, so it ends up being a win-win, and that's really kind of the nexus of what we're exploring, like how do we make it a win-win? What's the easiest path for everybody to move forward with it? In general, we had people who were living on the site until the end of the year. There's still one home there. Those folks have moved out, but they still have through the end of May to get all their items out of the home and potentially sell and move that home. But we've begun the work really quickly in January to start, getting things moving to stay on time. And not that we have a stress timeline here, but as soon as we can do things to get through the initial planning process, we've been teeing them up. So asbestos testing was conducted, the abatement's done. We coordinate with all the utilities providers, so that's all shut off, so we don't have any issues or risks with the site work that's taking place. We conducted an RFP with Parks, Recreation, and Forestry's assistance to do some logging of valuable timber on the site, so that's been done this last week. The soil borings, I mentioned those. Those are going to inform a lot of different aspects of the project and the soils underneath and things that you would have to address once you're into the ground. But that's a real key to staying on time for the architect's timeline in the design process as well. The residents living in 3 of the homes, they moved out at the end of the year. We did give an extension to one of them because he needed some time to get out more stuff, which was fine. We worked with him. You know, it's been kind of our mission, whether it's the village or the residents, just be a good neighbor, work with people, you know, make sure that we're not imposing on anybody, even though we're teeing off this, larger project. We've also worked with the Cronin-Wetter Fire Department. They've already been out there doing some smoke training. They'll do some fire training. They've been working with North Central Technical College on that. I believe Safer's been involved as well. But it's been a unique opportunity for them because these sorts of things don't often come up. I believe they're going to be doing some chainsaw training out there as well. And yes, we've signed all the requisite legal documents to indemnify us of anything that might happen. But nevertheless, even them doing chainsaw training helps clearing the site, which Highway's been out there cleaning it up and also getting some brush up and grubbing the site to just clear it up, which basically means we're not causing any erosion. We're just finding things on the site and cleaning it so that when you get to a point where you can actually start moving dirt, things are out of the way. When it comes to working with the village, it's really key. The schematic design phase, which is complete, that feeds directly into the site plan approval process. So their staff have been really instrumental, along with CPZ staff, and working with them to make sure that we're in alignment with their processes, what they need to see, how they need to see it, their timelines, any of the things that accompany those processes. And those meetings with the village have gone exceedingly well. It keeps us on the same page. It brings up unique ideas from their perspective and ours. And overall, I don't think those meetings could have gone any better. We've discussed, as I mentioned, their ordinances and processes because they are unique to different municipalities. There's an undeveloped right-of-way adjacent to the project site that would help the village and the county. We're kind of looking at the possibilities there. Right now, it's kind of to be determined. But if that were to be usable, then that would again help to address the stormwater requirements for both us and the village. The village also has a 20-foot strip of land abuts one part of the property that used to feed utilities to the homes, but the homes are gone. So now the village is like, well, we don't need it. Maybe it would help you out. So we're also talking about what that might look like. And if there's anything relating to what that transaction will look like, it would come back through you. The floodplain does creep into the project site a bit. So that's generated a lot of the stormwater conversations. Like, are there ways that we can help, mitigate, where the water goes and how to, on the site itself, but also there are zones in the adjacent areas where maybe you can do things that would preclude you from having to do something on the project site itself. And so there's been a couple neighbors who had some ideas. Again, none of these have come to fruition, but it's just a sign of the conversations taking place in terms of people saying, well, maybe we could do this. It's something I thought about doing, and that would help you offset this, the water situation, which I should say is not problematic. Even if nothing happened, we'd still be addressing all of those as required. Also, the desired approaches to water sources, namely like what parts of the building will be fed by the sewage district and the utilities, and what parts would be driven by well water. So those have also been identified. For the floor plans, those of you here in person have them in front of you. And anybody who wants a copy of these, I've got more and can provide them to anybody who's interested. I'll make sure there's a copy of these at the County Board Educational meeting for everyone again too. But just wanted to give you a sense of schematic design is complete. That doesn't mean the design is final, but really the main chunks of like the orientation, the layout, where the spaces are contemplated, how people get from A to B through which halls, those sorts of things have been really discussed at length to generate what's in front of you now. And so the color coding just helps you sort of discern between which part of the building you're looking at. So the beige area here on the top, you can see that's where the truck storage is. We've talked a lot about that in the past, about the time savings, the efficiencies, the equipment protections, all the things that come with actually being able to store your equipment inside in a temperature controlled space. It saves a lot of money, but from a personnel side, but also it extends the life of the equipment you're using. So that's where this is. We've also looked at using, trying to find ways to make like fluid fill-ups, fill up air in your tires, any sort of basic maintenance, have that really co-located with these areas so that it's easy for staff to do whatever they might need to do before they head out. The lower left area is the office area. So this is where the admin staff, the commissioner's office, some meeting rooms, things like that are all down in this corner. Things that would be similar to what's at the current facility. And then this longer rectangle is your fabrication shop here. The far right are wash bays, which again are important for when they're coming in off the roads. And if you can do that inside of a facility that's made to facilitate that sort of thing, it's a lot better than the alternative. And then you've got repair bays for when there's issues or just basic maintenance, and then parts and other equipment here. So again, sort of the nuts and bolts of what makes highway work. The next one, you've got the heated storage and unheated storage identified. The heated is the pink area, unheated is the kind of goldish area. And then the canopy storage is referencing those lean-tos pitched off the building to provide more additional space outside, probably with some pallet racking for equipment that can stay dry, but also the outside temps don't deteriorate it. The salt shed is on the far left. You've got basically material storage. So maybe you just need access to gravel or some asphalt. You need ready. You don't need to go into the building and make it complicated. You can just pull back into that area, get what you need, and get on your way. Moving into the interior, you've got this main square here as your primary just salt mountain. I'll call it a mountain because it is quite big. And then here you've got a salt sand mix. So salt sand obviously is an application depending on the weather and conditions. And then you've got solar salt storage here along with the brine facility. As the highway department has really shifted its operations towards doing a lot more brining. So this allows the solar salt, which is cleaner and costs a little bit more, but you save a lot more money on cleaning the equipment and time. Have that all co-located with a little heated storage area and a bathroom down in the bottom right. I believe that's a bathroom. For the construction timeline, the schematic design was completed on time. The work's continuing in developing the design overall, but right now the next big milestone for the project is getting to the village of Cronenwether through the site plan approval process. So that work will continue. These paths are running concurrent to one another. Spring to early summer 26, that's now through midsummer, we'll see most of the site clearing and demolition completed. And then the next few months will be focused on design development, which is the next primary phase in projects like this: schematic design, design development, and then goes to construction documents. So design development gets you to sort of 60% completion overall. And then once you get to construction documents, you're at that 90% point, which then is teeing up the eventual bid date for the project. The timeline that we have incorporates all the necessary county and village committee and board meetings. Obviously, if anything changed with those, we'd have to flex around those, but the whole project team is well aware of all that. We're looking at fall 26 this year for bidding the project, should we get to that point. But that doesn't necessarily, what we've done is looked at the timeline overall and saying at the culmination of the design and construction document process, it makes sense to bid it then. And then what we'll do is we would delay the start of the construction until the spring of next year. And what that really does is it saves you a lot of money and you don't have to pay for winter conditions. So it makes it a little easier. People can get everything ordered. One of the driving factors with AI data centers is that they've generated, according to reports, sort of a 10 to 12 month lead time on precast concrete panels. So it wouldn't make sense to build everything and then wait for 6 months for the precast to show up. We just aligned everything else with the lead times for the supply chain. The substantial completion for the project is targeted for summer 28. That allows winter operations for 27 to be done. And then that allows a smoother transition in that spring after winter is done for everything that, the main things and anything left to transition from the West Street location to the new location. So that would be when you would be substantial completion and looking to the ribbon cutting, et cetera, soon thereafter. For project budget, Myron's been working with schematic design to get the preliminary costs, which I'll touch on here in a second. It's been very helpful that they're actually currently constructing a county highway facility. So their cost estimations aren't them just looking at the industry, they're looking at what they're actually paying right now for these items. So then they can apply some industry math and if there's different types of inflation for the following years. You can peg that into the price and get a really good idea of what you're looking at. But the design development does bring the budget into more focus because where you're at now, there's still a lot of assumptions built in. Those assumptions will go away. There's also a contingency for design that's a normal part of the project, but that would come with changing the scope of the project dramatically. And we don't anticipate that. So while it's in the project budget right now, the lion's share, 80% of it likely goes away once you're through the design phase. So that will also reduce the overall price once we get to the final price. Also, like other projects of this scale, part of that construction document phase, which would be another update and meeting with infrastructure and the county board, there will be a guaranteed maximum price associated with that. So that basically says, here's your guaranteed maximum price that accounts for everything that's involved. And then, long story short, if there were things that went beyond that price that weren't accounted for in all the math that got there, then the construction manager would be responsible for those costs. Another way to see the timeline is we had our conceptual sort of design. We've had years of that. We just finished the schematic design. You can see we're getting closer and closer to the center of the target. So we used $50 million for the procurement process. That was an educated guess based on what we were seeing in other facilities, and also to help provide an apples to apples comparison for the procurement itself. So the initial cost estimate is floating around $53 million. But as I mentioned, there's some assumptions in there. There's the design contingency, that's, probably $2 to $3 million there. And then there's also further refinements with the design itself, along with alternatives to different parts of the project that we would look at out of just the planning phase of it, but also in case you got to bid day and something needed to be done differently, you would include those alternates to be bid on as well. So then you would have choices that you could make that were part of the bid. So the design development will revise things. Bidding will likely include those alternates like I mentioned. Value engineering, people have different ways of looking at that. The way we look at it is the hard conversations about, do you really need it, or is there another way to do it? And then what does it cost and what are the implications for the budget? So the final cost is still TBD, but we're in the realm that we thought we would be in. And then the GMP, that guaranteed maximum price, will be part of what would come later this year once construction documents were completed. And with that, I hope I didn't talk too quickly. Yeah, the resolution's also there. When we went to the initial phase to get the project moving, I made sure that, it's good just in general, but I think for projects this size, it's always a good idea to keep getting you updates so you see where we're at, what's going on, what are the costs involved, so that you've got check-ins along the way. And ultimately, it's a decision from you and the board on does the project continue or not at this point. So the resolution, the first resolution requires us to come back to you for this phase and then again for the next phase. So there's not sort of irreversible momentum behind anything, but this is that middle phase where moving on to the full-on design development phase since schematic is done. That's what the resolution is seeking, is authorization to move to phase 2, if you will.
The resolution's on page 54 of the packet, so if you're interested. Any questions for Chris? Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, thank you. The ability to collaborate with the village and whatnot, that's, I'm a systems person. I love that collaboration, and the colors on the visual, for the visual learner, nice for me. Just a couple of questions. I really hope we have this future-proofed as far as our energy. I know it's too early to put, say, solar on the roof or whatever, but what are you doing to make sure that that can be considered in this project?
The options, in terms of that question, just in general, the options have been a part of the discussion from the beginning. So yes, you could put solar on the roof. There is a point in time within the design process where you'd say, we're actually going to do this, because most likely you'd have to add some reinforced steel to hold the weight, even though they're not super heavy. But looking at where the site is, and like I mentioned, a floodplain is kind of creeping into part of the site, and the proximity of groundwater. Right now, the design includes a geothermal HVAC approach, so that's in there currently. And then anything beyond that, there's your traditional backup power and things like that, but anything beyond that, we haven't baked into the design yet. But, that would be further down to say, okay, what would it be, where would it go, and how much would that cost? Because ultimately, when we look at it, we look at traditional, we look at the alternatives, we look at what is the cost up front, what's the lifespan, maintenance costs, ROI, things like that. So we haven't put solar on there yet, but even if you got to a point where you said, look, it's not going to fit within the budget, you could still stub things into the facility to say, okay, you could put a ground mount out there and help net meter, if you will, part of your use. So we haven't got to the details of that yet, but the big piece is the geothermal from the HVAC perspective. So that's in there, and we'll keep refining what that looks like and how it works. But it is pretty slick.
Yep. And then have you, I don't know, we just built the Forensic Science Center. Any lessons you learned there that you are applying to this project to either get ahead of something or?
Mostly positive lessons, because it's just the way it worked out. Some of the same people are involved in both projects. So it's helped us to explain, just aspects of the project that you don't have to re-educate some of the people you're working with about what you're looking at and why you'd want to do it that way. Things like, generator size, we've looked at that. The generator at the morgue is a little oversized, but you're also, when you contemplate a mass casualty event, you're like, okay, well, what is it going to feed? So some of it, you're kind of looking ahead going, we don't know, but for this one, we're looking to make sure it's right size for those types of operations. We have discussed the idea of what would it be if there was a tornado that went through somewhere and you needed to have some sort of additional power backup. But again, we'll get more into the details of those types of things further along in a project. But yeah, I think we did look at geothermal for the morgue, but it wasn't going to work there. The ROI wasn't there. The HVAC, who was on the project at the time, the lead there, they did the math, showed us 400 or 500 different wells. So in any case, that fed, that was something we looked at when we referenced this project in terms of, at least Troy and I, in terms of the conversations we had then. It's not so much learning from that one per se, but I think even the architect who you'll meet soon, he and the project team we've been very candid on the front side about sort of contingencies, whose bucket does certain things fall into, so that when these things come up, and they always come up on projects, there's not going to be any of this going on in terms of discussion. And that's really, I'd say the way we did having all three, the construction manager, the architects team, and us at the table very early and throughout, that helps keep everybody on the same page, and it mitigates those types of changes. And then it also helps because you've had the conversations leading up to that should something come up, we've already sort of contemplated some of those things. So that's certainly continued in this project. I think, from my perspective, I've learned, the North Central Healthcare Campus is huge, but there's a lot of things in my time, in my initial interim role and current role, where we've had to change and adapt a lot of things because the questions that we're asking now weren't asked then. So that's probably been a bigger influence on me in terms of how we're looking at it, but also Troy for sure, because he was the lead on that project as well. So yeah, it's whether it's a morgue or North Central or even some of the smaller projects, they do sort of highlight things that you want to make sure you cover when you move forward into a new one. Yeah, site tours are also huge. Go to a few. It's easy to drive somewhere and look and see what someone's done, ask them very pointed questions. And then we kind of get together in a parking lot and like, well, I didn't like that. Did you like that? I didn't like that. I don't understand that. So that kind of real world examples is also super helpful. Even to say we want to do that, but we're going to do it a little differently because that doesn't make any sense to us.
Any other questions? Other questions?
I have one if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Supervisor Poole.
So just one of my big concerns about this is making sure that the facility is right-sized. I think designers often tend to overbuild these things, or they can at least. Just to illustrate the point, an anecdote, last session I was sitting on an Assembly Ways and Means Committee public hearing in a municipality I was in. They didn't have enough money to hire the police officers they needed. So they're just looking for like an exemption and a TIF to shift some money over to operations. But the deputy police chief, when he testified, he said, yes, how much they needed more police officers. They didn't have the funding. But he said their police station, that was fine. It was a great police station. He said it was the Taj Mahal of police stations, but they just didn't have enough money to fund police officers they needed. So I think everybody at that time thought, okay, so you built the Taj Mahal of police stations, and now you don't have enough money to hire police officers. So just want to make sure that we have a facility that's appropriate to the needs, a good place for everyone to work at, but it's just not overbuilt, and the budget's kind of reflected, making sure consideration to that effect is in place when you go over that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great point, and the term right size comes up quite a bit in our conversations. And part of that is those end user conversations with staff really help you, focus in on what really works for the people who are going to be using this space. And also, like with vehicles, like the trucks are getting bigger, so making sure that what you build now is going to hold trucks as you transition to a larger fleet. But also you get very precise with some of this stuff. So like people say, wow, that's a pretty big lot outside of the main building. But it's like, yes, but you also need to calculate the turning rate, the safe turning radius, I should say, for those trucks going in and out of the facility itself, in and out of the property itself. So you need to, you actually do the math and figure out, okay, this is enough room for them to maneuver. So yeah, it's a great point. In terms of being overbuilt, I can give, and from a facilities perspective, I'll give Troy a lot of props here. He and Craig, both our project planners, like they are not afraid to turn the screws on architects or construction managers when it comes to what do we want versus what do we need, and then what are sort of like realistic alternatives that are not budget killers. Because even with projects where we have that guaranteed maximum price or the budget, it's not that you're trying to build to the number, but once you have that set, then it's sort of, there's no debate. Like, we're going to drive this home because we have to fall in, we want to come in under budget, but also we're not trying to say build something where we get to, $49,999,999.99 so that we just get everything possible under that target. It's not like that at all. It really is focused on what you're speaking to. So it's a great point. It's not uncommon for that to happen. And I'll just give one last sort of point about this. We're very good at this. And when we reach out to other counties and work with them, they're calling us. We're working with Lincoln County and their processes. Right now, they're in the planning phase for some similar projects. Waupaca County, Kewaunee County, other counties we're working with, we're helping them get through the process because we're well-versed enough that their unfamiliarity that can lead to a lot of things you're speaking to, we can help them ensure that that doesn't happen.
Well, that's reassuring. I just want to make sure we don't end up with the Taj Mahal of county highway departments.
No, completely understood.
So if I could follow up on Supervisor Poole's question. So how many vehicles do we have now? And what's the capacity of the new facility in terms of vehicles? Because we're not necessarily adding a lot of lane miles in the county highway system. And I doubt that there's going to be a lot of expansion on the state highway system.
I think the comment Chris was making on that was as the fleet gets bigger regarding the size of the equipment. So we used to, when I started there 18 years ago, there was a fleet of single axle trucks, and then we stepped up to tandems, and now we run even quads on them. So as we buy trucks, we're generally buying larger trucks so that they can cover more area and then serve multi-purpose. We used to have summer and winter vehicles for a large part. That was just the way it was designed. Or the single axle plow trucks, they're not efficient for hauling any materials. They don't have enough capacity, and the rate for them is close to what a quad axle dump truck is. So as we've been converting those trucks over, the size he's referring to is the size of the physical truck taking up the space. That's where we run into the issues now where we can't park our trucks with their equipment on inside of our sheds. So it wasn't that we're adding pieces of equipment, it's that things are getting larger.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you. And then on that vein, I wanted to make sure that maybe not with this particular building, but with this property, the opposite of this, if we're in the situation right now because the current facility isn't expandable, are we going to run into that situation here in the long-term future? Don't want us to be here in 100 years going, wow, we ran out of space in Cronenweider, now we have to rebuild.
Yeah.
Granted, that probably isn't any of our responsibility, so.
Well, the last facility lasted for 233 years, right, Kevin? But no, in all seriousness, to the right sizing of the site and the project there is a look ahead to the size of the equipment, what you would need, and, you know, to the chair's point about road miles not changing. And so in terms of fleet expansion, there hasn't been a lot of like, we're gonna have to expand this building for housing more trucks. That being said, there are a couple areas, it's not gonna be on this here. Actually, no, you can't see it. You can see some of these lines here. These are contemplating the potential for additional salt storage. So this is a potential build on down the road, should you end up, you know, needing that space for anything. Same thing with the equipment. There's ability to expand out just slightly. I mean, these are doors going in and out, but also there's a way for you to kind of add into the space to gain some canopy storage or actual square footage. So, and here's another one, a dashed area. So these are just ideas based on the conversations like you're alluding to, that there would be enough room on the site should you need to expand something for some reason. But I think the main focus is really on right sizing what we have now, what we can see in the foreseeable future. And then, but yeah, I think the site in general is nested within some properties that could come up vacant. But there's a cemetery nearby. That one won't be moving. But yeah, I think there's less of a worry from our perspective about the concerns you identified, I guess I should say. But the ones that we know of and can think of down the road, we've brought them up in the conversation to make sure like where those trucks are turning, those trucks can still turn if you were to expand a building.
If I can add one thing, you know, a lesson, Chris talked about lessons learned, and he brought up our Lakeview project. I would say the big lesson for me, and other counties are reaching out with similar ideas to kind of better understand what we did, rather than looking at sites as truly individual things. Like your question is great, is this site something that can be expandable and or is it gonna be the right size for the future? But also be very intentional with looking at your collection of sites. We have multiple highway shops. And how do we look at those things as a system? Again, one of the big reasons or I should say, one of the supporting reasons for why locating the site in Cronenweider made sense is it allowed us to essentially plan to decommission a storage site in Mosinee. So looking at our system of highway shops, our multiple highway shops, I think should we end up in a situation in 100 years, if that's the first time we have a problem, I think that's a huge win. But if in 10 years we have situations like, we really have a need for additional space relative to our highway operations, the conversation we need to have is not how do we add it onto the site in Cronenweider. It's how do we figure out where is best to add it on within our available footprint for highway and other county facilities. And I think we have done very, very well in that regard. I mean, you look at Chris, one of the many other things he's doing is the UW campus and holding meetings and putting that out for RFP. We're putting out the RFP for River Drive and Thomas Street later this year. Those are all because of, other than the UW, they're all because of our ability to think about our collection of facilities rather than a single facility. So I think that would be, if that came up, Supervisor Hart, that's the approach I would expect us to take, is how do we solve that problem, not within the Cronenweider facility box, but within the larger highway collection of facilities.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the things that was discussed at least initially when we talked about the site, was a potential laydown area for material. Now, taking into consideration the administrator's comments, maybe those have now moved to different locations for gravel laydown or culvert laydown. I don't see that on any of this design. Is there any, is that been relocated to different facilities, or is there a place on here that I'm not seeing?
I can say that some of that has been incorporated into the salt storage shed. These storage, this would be gravel, asphalt, and materials. In terms of a gravel laydown area, I'll see
It'd be on the south side.
down here. And it says gravel yard storage, this shaded area here, sorry.
Oh, okay.
It's all one shaded color. This is the best one I have, and I apologize for that. I'll get a better one for the next round.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions? Not the issue before us is whether we'll advance this, the resolution calling to advance the design to the county board. What are your wishes? This has been through infrastructure last week. Supervisor Lemmer?
Would move to forward this on to the county board, the design onto the county board.
All right, we have a motion to advance the resolution to the county board. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? Not all is in favor of advancing the resolution, authorizing, moving on to the next construction phase. The county board will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, Administrator Leonard will now talk about your potential
Financing.
funding strategy.
All right, well, that's on page 55 is your first some presentation materials. We do have Kristen Hansen on again, I believe, virtually, and Sam, between the two of them, they will take any and all hard questions you have. I'm gonna start with bottom line up front. We're not seeking action today. From a staff perspective, there's no need for you to take any action. But you certainly could, it's agendized for you to do it because that's how it was last time, and we wanted to leave the world to be your oyster again. But again, the presentation begins on page 55, and let me start with what it's not. We're not gonna rehash, unless you want to, the presentation from January. That presentation in full is in your packet. We put it in again to be as transparent as possible on page 77. But starting again on page 55 is a follow-up presentation with some materials that Kristen and her team put together, because those materials were a response to a very specific question that was asked of the staff, and that was a more direct comparison. I think the word apples to, or the phrase apples to apples was used, but more direct comparison of what it would look like to use the North Central Healthcare revenues over the 6-year term to acquire the 20 million, what that impact on the tax levy would look like, as opposed to issuing debt for the 20 million over that same 6-year term, and what would that impact be on the tax levy? So that is what the very specific materials, beginning on page 55, will lay out for you, and Kristen can talk you through it. I'll give you again, bottom line up front. This, I don't think will surprise any one of you. The cost to get the 20 million through the North Central Healthcare revenue, the impact on the levy, I should say, is less than if you were to issue more debt and levy for it. I know, earth shattering. Nothing outside the box there. Also not surprising, it's less costly and therefore less impact on the levy to borrow that money over 6 years and pay it back than it is to borrow and pay it back over 20, right? Long term, it's just like if you buy in a house and you get a 15-year mortgage versus a 30, it ends up saving you money in the long term. in terms of financing costs. So I again stole all the thunder with no earth-shattering realizations that are coming here. But with that, Kristen, I will flip through the slides as you direct me. But anything else, Sam, you wanted to start off to kick us off here? All right, Sam's got nothing. We'll jump in. If you have anything, feel free.
Just as a reminder, the 20 million is because we designated the 30 million already for the highway funding. This is the extra 20 million needed for what we anticipated to be that $50 million budget.
Perfect. That was very good. All right, Kristen, you want to take it away?
I do. First of all, can you hear me?
Indeed, we can.
Yes.
Excellent. So, as Lance indicated, this is a slightly different presentation focusing on more of an analysis of two options where you're kind of comparing, similar time frame for financing the highway shop. So looking at page 3, which I believe is the slide that's up on your screen, this is just showing the county's outstanding debt as of February 1st. This has been updated since January because a number of your debt issues, you make principal payment on February 1st. So the total outstanding debt as of February 1st, as well as March 1st, because the principal payments are made in February, is just under 83 million. And along with that, we did update the county's debt limit based on your outstanding GO debt. And right now, based on your 2025 equalized value and debt limit being limited to 5% of that, you're with the remaining debt outstanding of just shy of 83 million, you're using 8.8% of your debt capacity, and your remaining borrowing capacity is just under 92%. So what we did was, based on the meeting in January, is we looked at two different options. So the first option is using the revenues that the county is receiving from the healthcare center to finance a portion of the highway building over time. This would not involve any additional new debt. It would discontinue the use of the revenues that the county is receiving from the healthcare center that you're currently using to reduce the debt service levy and apply that towards the highway building, so that at some point the county will be levying that full amount of the outstanding GO debt, including the debt that had been issued for the healthcare center. And then the goal was to keep the county's total mill rate constant. So not just isolating the debt, the mill rate for debt, but for all of the county's operations. And so for comparative purposes, each of the options, of the two options we're discussing today, assume a 6-year term. And then once that 20 million is reached for the highway building, then the county can go back and use those revenues to offset the debt service payments. So this slide has lots of numbers on it. So just, and I do believe it's also in your packets, but essentially the columns on the left side show the fiscal year, the county's total debt service that you're levying for. This does not include the county's airport debt. It shows that current offset that is being used with the healthcare center revenues to come up with your existing debt service levy. So this is just kind of the left side of all of the numbers is showing kind of what's the current situation is. The remaining part of this chart shows all of the county's kind of total levy, including the debt service, including the operating, library, and culvert aid levies to come up with that total levy. So there's a middle column that says total mill rate, including debt. Then there's a new column that says additional amounts to be levied. So this is where, with the target to keep the total mill rate the same, the far right column, it's taking the healthcare center revenues over 6 years to come up with that 20 million. So there is part of this time that you will be using some of the healthcare center revenues to continue to make a slight payment towards the debt service, just in order to keep the county's total mill rate levy over those 6 years, till you're finally using all of it until you come up with the 20 million, which is at that bottom. And so you can see on the far two right columns, the total new levy, which includes county's debt service levy, operating library culvert aid levy, and then keeping that total mill rate on the right levy or constant. So you can see that 3.4892 for 3 years, and eventually it drops down. And then you can see once that 20 million is used for the highway building, that goes back to reducing the debt service levy, and you can see the mill rate goes down at that point in time. So that was kind of the goal, was using the healthcare center revenues that have been using to offset or reduce the debt service levy, but to apply it towards the construction of the highway building, keeping the county's total mill rate level with, and then once the 20 million is used for the highway building, those healthcare center dollar revenues can be used to offset the debt levy going forward. Lance, I don't know if you have anything you want to say about that.
Nope, I think that's good. That's the, again, apples to apples comparison. I think I'll wrap up with my thoughts after you're done with the whole thing.
Okay. So the next slide is a visual, is a graph that shows the existing debt service levy is the blue bars, and the additional amounts to be levied is the gray bars. And that really is the additional amount to be levied means that the county would be levying for more of the debt service payments than they are now, because you wouldn't be using the healthcare center revenues to offset the levy. And then once the 6 years you've captured the 20 million over 6 years, you can see that the existing debt service levy comes back down to below $2 million a year. And we are assuming at this point in time a 4% growth in value in both of these options. In the presentation I did in January, we did include a historical perspective of what's been happening with your values. And over the last 15 years, it's been about 4.5%. Over the last 5 years, it's been closer to 9%. So that's a conservative number, the 4% growth. The next slide shows what would happen if the county were to issue 6-year debt to finance the portion of the highway building. And that would be, the county would issue geo-promissory notes over a term of 6 years to finance the remaining portion of the highway building. And you would continue to use the revenues that you're currently receiving from the healthcare center to reduce your outstanding debt service levy. So that right-hand column on the 2 slides before would continue as planned. And what's important to note, for those of you that had been involved in any of the debt issuances with the county before, is that if you want a net 20 million, you have to issue slightly more than 20 million, because there are cost of issuance that are built into sizing a debt issue. So if you want that 20 million to be available for construction, there are fees, fee for financial advisor, which is our fee, fees for bond and disclosure counsel. There'd be a rating agency fee. There would be a fee for posting your official statement. And then there would be a not to exceed underwriter's discount, which we would set as a maximum, and that gets bid when you competitively bid debt on the competitive market. So to net 20 million for construction, you would probably you would bring $20,330,000 to the public market to sell at a competitive sale. So the highway shop 6-year notes issued in 2026. The far left columns are all the same as from the prior. You will see that we're still assuming the 4% growth in value. The borrowing amount is that 20,330,000. Just for purposes of illustration, we assumed a level debt service schedule, and we're assuming an interest rate of 3%. You may recall you got some very, very favorable interest rates a number of years ago when you were issuing the debt for the healthcare center, less than 2%. Market's not there anymore. So you can see the right 2/3 of the slide. You have that same operating library and culvert aid and that total levy. You can see that mill rate. And then we've structured in that level principal and interest. The Series 2026 promissory notes, the annual debt service is right about 3.7 million. And what's important and highlighted in yellow is at the kind of bottom of those columns is that the interest cost would be 1,882,000 using that 3% interest rate on a 20,330,000 GO note. Scrolling, looking at the very right-hand column with the total mill rate, you can see that 3.4892 is what you saw when we were trying to keep that levy, the mill rate constant, but with the additional debt service being added over 6 years, that mill rate does go up more than what you saw in that other option. The next slide shows visually what's happening. The blue bars are the existing debt service levy, and those are net of using the healthcare center revenues to keep the debt service levy lower. And then you can see those gray bars or equal gray bars would be the principal and interest payment on a 6-year note issued in 2026. And once again, once that 6-year happens, in this case, similar to the other scenario, that net debt service drops down to under that 2 million. I think that's the last slide.
Thanks, Kristen. So again, just to recap what Kristen laid out for you, again, it's not a plan. We're not advocating for any of those options, but it's in response to the question that was asked about that apples to apples comparison. Again, nothing earth shattering. The just shy of 1.9 million that Kristen referenced on that slide of those interest costs on that 20-year note that would be issued. You'll recall back to the January presentation, if you borrow that over 20 years and pay it back, we were talking about interest based on whatever interest rate there were various models, but 6 million. So yeah, 1.9 is better than 6. But just like all of us, if you were looking at purchasing a house, much prefer to not have to take out a loan if you had another option. So again, I think that is, again, the bigger takeaway. Just a couple other things I feel obligated to say. The tentative plan, or the plan that certainly I will recommend as we move later in this process, to use those North Central Healthcare revenues. Those revenues aren't guaranteed. We've been operating very well with North Central Healthcare, and they've been able to service that debt. And the debt service schedules and the agreement call for them to continue to ratchet up that service. But that is evaluated every year. And that really brings me to my last point. Not asking for action here today from a staff perspective. It is agendized for you as a body to make any recommendations you may want. But the reason that, as we talked more as a team, no action was necessary, it really kind of builds on the presentation that Chris gave, that there's really not a need for any budget amendment at this point, and the discussion about how to finance this really will become more timely during budget preparation. That's when we will need to have those discussions. If you want to have them in a different cadence earlier, we can do that. But that is, again, kind of the presentation as a whole. The other thing I included, apart from the presentation from January that Kristen put together, the slides, there is an article from what I'll say is a government magazine. It's Governing is the name of the periodical, talking about municipal bonds. And certainly, Kristen, I don't know if you saw that in there, but you can feel free to elaborate. But the needs that municipalities have, and when I say municipalities, again, I'm including counties in that, but cities, villages, towns certainly, and then other local governments, counties, and states are continuing to issue growing amounts of bonds because of, as referenced in the article, there's just a great deal of infrastructure to maintain, which again, I think that Marathon County's in a good spot, apart from the reason that Kristen referenced that we have debt that was issued at very competitive rates that we can put onto levy. But we also have been, over the last several years, really very intentional with trying to look at ways to look at our footprint differently and consolidate, and hopefully in the near future, look to divest and redevelop some of those currently county-owned properties to get them to generate revenue and hopefully, again, property tax. All that said, your needs for infrastructure maintenance are not going away. The highway shop is, building a new shop is certainly going to be expensive, but the capital needs that we as a county have are not going away. Again, to go back to our budget discussion as part of this year's budget, which again, you adopted in 2025, we had a lot of capital needs that we pushed off. That was intentional, and that was, I know we know that, but again, I feel obligated to say it. So this opportunity that's in front of us, when the board is trying to figure out what's the best way to finance the highway shop, but set us up for success relative to long-term infrastructure maintenance. Avoiding borrowing is always good. So with that, happy to answer any questions. Sam, what did I miss? Actually, blaming it on Kristen. What did Kristen miss?
So I have a comment and then a question. The comment is that I would support delaying a decision on this until later in the year, partly because Chris had indicated a $53 million potential budget. I think we would be in a better position to know what that is. But my question is that the assumption is that we have the money to pay for the project when the expenses are incurred, and yet the 20 million is generated over a 6-year period of time. So how do we pay the bills in the interim while we're collecting those fees? So, because we're not gonna have all 20 million up front. So what is the approach to doing that?
So the nice thing about the project is we don't need the 20 million as of 2026. So we've got a couple, maybe a year or two in there where we're actually gaining some of that money and the interest in the interim. And then the rest of it just kind of becomes a borrowing from the general fund that gets replenished through that North Central Healthcare debt over the next couple of years. So it does take away some of the flexibility with other projects that pop up. And we still have that 30 million in the highway that will exhaust before we start touching any of that 20 million. I know part of that project plan is getting that fiscal structure of where those cash disbursements are anticipated, to make sure that we have the cash flow in place. So we've been making sure we work with our financial advisors, that we have cash on hand, when project costs start coming in, but that we're also continuing to gain interest in the meantime, to the maximum benefit.
So just as a follow-up to that, then I think it is incumbent upon us to clearly articulate that there will be that borrowing from the general fund. And the consequences of that are to our capital improvement plan, and I would not want to go for additional bonding during that 6-year period for fear of a potential downgrade in our bond. So I think we have to look at it holistically. And, I know tonight there's a discussion on the ice arena. And And I think as we look at other things, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're manipulating our reserves from the perspective of being prudent, but not necessarily to get the best return should we need to borrow in the future. So I think we need to communicate that to the board.
Yeah, if I could add one thing, Sam, absolutely right. It's all about timing and structuring. To your underlying question though, Mr. Chair, I think it's also very important to point out that, again, if you transition those North Central revenues to levy, transition the revenues for this project, moving the debt service onto the levy. Once the highway shop is financed, you're in a much better position for the things that we all know we did push off, not only this year, but we will likely have to do some more of that. Again, it's a timing question, but long-term, one big takeaway for me is I sit on weekly calls with other administrators. The number of counties that are to a point where they are borrowing every year to do what I would call routine maintenance, particularly on their highway systems, continues to grow. Not saying we will never get there, but my goal is to keep that off in the distant future in terms of when we need to do it, because all that does, consistent with what Kristen just walked you through, all that does is increase the overall cost of the project.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
So just in case NCHC doesn't keep up with the payments, would our fallback then be borrowing?
We'd have to, my thought would be, and Sam, please keep me honest, we'd assess that as it happened. You'd take a look, we'd take a look at what our reserves are, we'd take a look at what are our incoming revenues sources as well. As I said, hopefully, we'll have one-time dollars that will come in a couple of areas that should also have long-term operating savings. You talk about the UW divestment, not expecting that to bring in a great deal of revenue on the front end, but certainly there's a small benefit of operating revenue moving forward. River Drive and Thomas Street are a bit different. Not only the increase in terms of incoming revenues, but also significant decrease in terms of operational costs. But I would say it would depend, right? It's no different than the analogy that I like to use when I'm talking about, performance and improvement is, there's a reason when you step on a scale, it's not just, oh, I'm off target, but Lance cares immediate to a great degree whether I'm 5 pounds away from where I want to be or 30, because the intervention's different. And I guess I would say the intervention, the strategy would be dependent on how far away we are from the target.
Chair Gibbs.
I think the other thing, you mentioned the River Drive Social Services building, but also at some point, once the move is complete, then there's the redevelopment of the existing highway shop that potentially could be utilized at some point to reduce that debt.
So if I could just maybe throw out the concept, could we build this discussion into the budget assumptions going into 2027 budget? I think it's critical.
That's precisely the plan, so
Okay.
good. I think we're on the same page on that.
Other questions? Are you comfortable? So basically, we'll see this in a couple of months, coming right back at us. So that decision will be made prior to going to the county, the new county board in May and June of this year. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on then. Thank you for that update and that information. Next is the resolution authorizing joining the PFAS litigation. Who's on first?
I'll start, and I think any other questions? I don't know what we'll do if we get hard questions. Brian can't be here today. So the memo that Brian put in the packet that was referenced in public comment kind of lays out the situation we have. In short, we have a situation that's somewhat analogous to the opioid litigation that the county joined a number of years ago. That is, it's a large, in fact, nationwide effort, a multi-district litigation that is organized in, I believe it's South Carolina. It's either north or south. South. That is open to various entities to join. Municipalities are a frequent joiner of such litigation. The litigation is focused around potential costs associated with cleanup relative to PFAS. Now, the stage of the litigation, we were contacted by Attorney Andy Phillips, who works closely with Wisconsin Counties Association from Atolis Law. The stage of that litigation, they anticipate in the near future moving into a group. They essentially break it up into various cohorts. And the next, one of the future cohorts really is looking at municipally owned airports. And why airports, you might ask? And in the memo, again, is a reference to airport firefighting foam, which was a requirement that we utilize that. And of course, Marathon County, in partnership with Portage County, we jointly own land on which the Central Wisconsin Airport is located and operates. So that was kind of the impetus to them reaching out. However, we also are very fortunate in that we own and operate a landfill. And Dave is here. A lot of great benefits from the landfill. One of the challenges, as you've heard frequently, is the treatment of leachate. We spend, as was, I don't know if it's referenced in the memo, but approximately $1 million a year in the hauling and treatment of leachate from our landfill. That leachate has within it, because again, we are the receiver of waste, and some of that waste does have PFAS, so it has PFAS in it. And there's a cost associated with that hauling and that treatment. So the ultimate decision that's before the county board is, do you want to join this litigation that is ongoing within that multi-district litigation ongoing in South Carolina? And there's, in addition to the memo within the packet, there's a number of materials that we were provided in speaking with Andy Phillips, and those materials include the nationwide law firm that's leading this effort. Again, very similar to the opioid litigation. There was nationwide counsel, and then Atolis Law worked closely with Wisconsin counties and the Wisconsin Counties Association to kind of marshal that through. But there's nationwide counsel materials that are in there that, again, provide an overview of the litigation itself and kind of what those next steps are. One of those next steps would be testing, and they would take that on. So I am not in a great position to be able to answer a lot of your questions that I'm sure you're going to have. But what I can report to you is that we do have Andy Phillips coming. Chair Gibbs has worked with Attorney Andy Phillips to have him come present at the upcoming educational meeting of the county board this month. As part of that, Attorney Phillips is hoping to work with nationwide counsel to have them be available to answer questions. But certainly, Attorney Phillips will be in a better position to provide a background and kind of what the next steps in future look like for that litigation. And he will be able to do that at the full board the full board educational meeting. So I will continue to take questions. I know Committee Chair Robinson submitted some questions to me via email, as did Supervisor Lemmer. If I do have an answer or what I suspect to be an answer, happy to provide those here today. But what I will absolutely commit to is capturing those questions and getting those to Attorney Andy Phillips so that he can have some advance notice of what he should cover in his presentation, if he's able to do that, or if nationwide counsel is better suited to do that. But that's at a high level what the options are before the county board. Essentially, we join or we don't. And I will just say, if we don't, I did have conversations with Brian about this, Corporation Counsel Desmond. I mean, very candidly, we are not in a position with the internal resources and expertise to do this sort of stuff. This is something you'd need outside counsel to do. And there is outside counsel, similar again to the opioid litigation, that has experience in this area. So if we're going to take advantage of it, it's going to be through a strategy similar to this, some other outside counsel. So with that, Mr. Chair, happy to try to answer some questions, or if nothing else, serve as a scrivener while you offer your questions.
I'd just like to share, I did send an email to the administrator, and when I look at Marathon County's potential exposure as it relates to PFAS, we have the AFFF firefighting foam that was used at the airport mandated. I know that Brian Griefey and I both served on the DNR's PFAS External Advisory Committee, and we've had a number of discussions. He doesn't think that there's a lot of exposure associated with that, but there may be some. We don't know what the historic practices are, where FAA did require the use of AFFF foam because of its effectiveness in fighting airplane fires, which means you had training exercises, which is one of the reasons why the town of Campbell in the La Crosse area and in the Tyco facility and in the Marinette Petco area have issues with PFAS in their groundwater. But we also have potential exposure associated with us being a passive receiver of PFAS at the Marathon County solid waste facility. And we receive area-wide material that breaks down and releases PFAS into the leachate. The current proposal is to deal with that through a reverse osmosis system that basically concentrates the PFAS and recirculates it on site. It doesn't destroy it. And we would have ongoing liability potentially for that PFAS beyond the closure during the long-term care period of time. I would want to make sure that if we settle and we enter this lawsuit, and it's focused on AFFF foam, that we not do anything that would jeopardize that or other claims. Another potential claim would arise out of 3M has their crushing facility in this area. One of the things they do with those crushed granular materials is coat them. And one of the coatings has PFAS in it. Some of the highest concentrations of PFAS are at the Greystone facility in the Village of Maine. But that material has been used all over this community in filling in lands, parklands. Holtz Krause has a significant amount of it in there, but we would want to make sure that if there were issues that arose out of that, that we again would not jeopardize our future claims. And the final area is our incidental use as a purchaser of materials that are built into, may have been used at the highway facility and others, relative to our normal processes. There were PFAS that were very effective in oil and water separation. A number of others, we want to make sure we protect ourselves in those areas. And if we can make sure that those issues are addressed, that would then also want to see how much flexibility we have relative to the fee at 25% plus their cost, and whether or not there's any ability to look at that agreement. But those were the issues that I had raised with the administrator, and I know that they have consolidated the suits in South Carolina courts. I know that a number of states have moved ahead with litigation, New Jersey and others, but Wisconsin has some suits relative to Tyco and others. I don't know the status of that litigation, but it would make sense to address it on an MDL versus a class action perspective where we're not in the lead, but I think there's some questions that need to be answered.
And if I could, you raise a good point, Mr. Chair, about other municipalities, and I neglected to mention, my understanding is that both Winnebago County, I should say, my understanding is other counties have taken action to join. I believe Winnebago and Eau Claire are two examples.
Supervisor Lemmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I too sent about 1,000 questions to the administrator. Mine are probably more basic, but I think the public might have some of these same ones. You know, I see an intersection and I'm confused. These are drinking water standards that the DNR has set, but we are looking at environmental standards, and how does that intersect with the new legislation that might be coming out? I don't remember the bill numbers. 130 and 131. And then we have the trust fund, or I think it's a trust fund. But anyway, there's just, does us getting into litigation impact any of that? I mean, those are just questions I'd like to know. I also would love a quick high-level overview of the leachate management plan, just to see how that fits going forward, because I thought I remember, that, I don't know if it's a water treatment plant or just the reverse osmosis being there. Would this pay for that? And then are there funds available to protect landowners around our properties that might be impacted with their drinking wells? Does that come into play at all? And is there a possibility that we set up some sort of, revolving fund, a loan, so that people can get testing done with their wells that are nearby some of our properties? I don't know what's possible, what we already have, if that's even an issue. So you can look at my questions, though.
I can perhaps address some of that. In my side capacity, I co-chair the Wisconsin Green Fires Contaminants of Emerging Concern Work Group, and I'm a member of the DNR's External Advisory Committee on PFAS, and also participate in monthly meetings with a number of environmental groups relative to PFAS. And we had a meeting yesterday relative to the AB 130 and AB 131 that have passed the Assembly, and I believe passed joint finance today and are scheduled for action next week. But there was a trust fund that was created for the state of Wisconsin, and as currently proposed, they would take about 50, don't hold me to the exact numbers, but about $56 million for sort of the municipal side of things, about $35 million for the private owners and smaller systems, and $5.2 million for airports and some industrial sources. That's a start. Probably won't address all of it, and it certainly doesn't get at many of the wastewater issues and leachate issues that Dave is looking at. But there are a series of exemptions in there, and efforts to hold those people that are innocent, not hold them responsible for the cleanup. But the state has used ARPA funds in the past for some of that testing. Those funds are obviously depleted. So this fund would help in some of those cases. I think we want to give some thought to how we would frame a grant program for private owners. I think it would be better to be dealt with in a state level. They've got the income eligibility criteria, the ability to look at it, but it is a concern going forward. And I think that people are optimistic that the PFAS trust fund release will occur this year, and there are additional positions for the DNR to administer the grants associated with that.
And then just, we do have a strategic plan that Dave has worked on with the landfill, and we have some leachate management strategies which we can try to address. But, your threshold, one of the threshold questions I think you asked was, would the funds be available for the treatment component out at the landfill? And that is, if you kind of read through all the nationwide council materials and the memo, that is the underlying idea that, look, we are now, the landowner, in this case, the county, whether it's the airport or the solid waste department is we're responsible for dealing with what we have, and that containment and or treatment is one of the underlying goals of the litigation. Again, very similar to the opioid litigation, when you talk about the reason the counties were plaintiffs in that litigation is because we were directly impacted because of our obligation and through the services we provide, that we had increased costs, increased expense. Similar logic here, right? There's the negative impact to the counties or the municipalities, whether you're a wastewater treatment center, a municipal water center, landfill or airport. There's a cost now associated with, or anticipated cost if we're held accountable to clean up with that contamination. So same kind of analogous logic.
So then, if, just to follow up, I haven't looked deeply at our comp plan with PFAS in mind, but it sounds like, based on your memo, this is evolving and it could be something that continues. Is this addressed in the comp plan, I guess, adequately? That would just be something I just wondered if that should be looked at again before it's finalized.
I'll take a look.
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I think the question before us today is the premise of, do we engage council and discuss the potential joining of the litigation? And as I totally understand the questions that we have, and I think, hopefully we'll be able to get some of those answers when Mr. Attorney Phillips is here, and if he's able to bring in counsel from the national standpoint, we'll be able to get some of those answers. I don't know that we have some of the answers that are asked, by my colleagues as to whether or not, what the uses are, because I think if we join the fund and we receive funds, there may be, similar to the opioid funds, there may be structured limitations as to what they can be used for. And so we would have to potentially, and reporting possibly requirements. So, but I would support moving this at least to the full board for discussion, and hopefully answers to a lot of those questions by council at our next meeting on the 19th. So my motion is to move the authorization to engage outside counsel to the full board for consideration.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Hart.
Just a real quick question, that presentation, so that would be coming at the same night then, that the county board would be considering this? Okay.
It'll come at the educational meeting.
Educational
so we'll
meeting,
be
not
voting.
before, so we'll get answers to it before. And we can always understand that if we don't have all the answers, we can always pull it.
Any discussion? Not all those in favor of advancing this to the county board will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you. Consideration of offer to purchase county-owned land from the Village of Edgar pursuant to the email we received earlier this afternoon. Administrator Leonard.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been a busy week. So one of the things that has been on the work plan the last couple of years, really looking at cleaning up that tax delinquent property list and the surplus property list. So I believe you last looked at this in earnest in 2022. But Marathon County does currently own a portion of a roadway in, I believe it's Maple Street in the Village of Edgar. The origins of which, I don't feel confident in explaining how it is that we came to own that part of that roadway. Nevertheless, we've talked about trying to divest it and sell it to the Village of Edgar. And in 2022, the county directed Corporation Counsel Pierner at the time and myself to engage the village. We did that with an offer of $881.30. The village kindly refused. And we have continued to own a portion of roadway. So I revisited that issue with the village administrator a couple of weeks ago. Because again, there's truly no benefit to us owning that. And asked the village administrator to revisit that with the village board. They did. They met earlier this week. And they have conveyed to me, which I conveyed to you in writing, an offer for the village to purchase that property for $100, plus they would pay for the recording fees to essentially take that property and get it in the village's hands. You're looking for a recommendation. I think this makes great sense. I don't see any benefit. All I see are potential problems with continuing to own the portion of roadway, and we'll spend the difference between what you originally offered back in 2022 and $100 if we talk about it long enough. So you have additional questions, I'll try to answer them, but that's where we are. This would need to go to the full board because, again, I'm not comfortable with how it is we came to own it. I think the safest bet is to have a recommendation, if you're looking to transfer this to the village, have that go to the full board for consideration. We can do that this month and get this cleaned up.
Any questions? If not, what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion that we accept the offer from the Village of Edgar for the purchase of the land that we own in the village.
Is there a second? Seconded by Vice Chair Marshall. Any discussion? Not all those in favor of approving the offer to purchase from the Village of Edgar will signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Resolution adopting budget modification policy. Administrator Leonard.
So this is back before you based on the direction you provided previously. The materials in your packet actually start on page 3. That's with a resolution, but there is a memo. Again, we updated the memo that you had before you. I believe it was in January. Couldn't bring this back in February. Both Sam and I were unable to attend your meeting, but we did update the memo and updated the policy, adding some of the things you had requested at the time. The most notable change we made was we updated some definitions to get those consistent. We added a supermajority vote for what was budget category 3A and kind of just tweaked some of the language. Sam did a great job of adding the additional examples within the budget modification policy. That policy begins on page 7. But I think that sufficiently covers kind of how we got here and what you're looking at. If you do have questions, happy to try to answer those. Sam, anything you wanted to highlight in terms of the changes? Again, these were changes that you looked at it previously and you directed us to make those changes. We did. Everything else stayed the same.
The issue before us is adoption of the budget modification process. If this goes through, we will need to amend Chapter 2 of the county ordinances, and that's being proposed as part of the rules package that will come up for a vote in April, so that would be incorporated. So what are any questions? It's been before us a couple of times. Now, what are your wishes? Supervisor Lemmer?
I would just move to adopt the budget modification policy.
Is there a second? Seconded by Vice Chair Marshall. Any discussion on the motion? Not all those in favor of the budget, clarifying the budget modification process will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. All right, that will take us down into educational presentations. 7A is a discussion of the Wisconsin Legislative Conference meeting. Kurt, do you want to go first? We had a number of participants in this room.
Excuse me. So we had a number of people there, yourself, the administrator, myself, were at the legislative conference, WCA legislative conference, and they discussed several legislative priorities that WCA was working on and where some of that legislation sets. And I would say that over the past year, 2 years, the WCA has been working on probably one of their major issues that they were looking at was court funding and trying to advance because the court system is a state system that is also administered by the county. So one of the challenges is the current funding structure. As most people look at it, or as the counties association did some analysis, it has been shown that that the counties are paying roughly 80% of the cost and the state is 20%. And so the WCA was looking to increase that funding more to a 50-50 level. And one of the major emphasis was a $70 million ask in the budget. That did not come to play. Effectively, when the legislature met and developed the budget, they initially said that there was going to be no general purpose revenue increase for anyone. And so, but through WCA's efforts, WCA and the legislature did apportion an additional roughly $10 million of court funding for the state. And that did pass in the budget. But there was also legislation then that was taken up to potentially provide some additional resources to counties. And that was in separate legislation that would provide an increase in fees. Currently, the fee structure, certain fees that are assessed in our legal system, the state shares a significant portion of those fees, and the county receives some of those. So the legislation would increase some of those fees. And of the increase, the counties would receive 95% of those increases. And the state would get 5% of those increases. The base that the fees would still remain the same, split between the state and the counties. And so that legislation, I think, has been approved by both legislatures and is sitting at the governor's desk now. And that would increase funding that the counties would retain, estimated roughly an additional $17 million. So that will help when we talk about the disparity, if you will, between the funding sources that currently sit. There was other legislation. One of the pieces of legislation that WCA talked about was one that was probably initiated because of Marathon County and was talked about. In specific was being able to retain some of the tipping fees that is used to fund in specific the potential project that we're talking about out at the solid waste facilities in treating our leachate. And so that also is going to the Senate committee this next week. And potentially to the Senate. It's received overwhelming bipartisan support, both at the Assembly and passed through the Assembly on a voice vote. So it's very optimistic that that will continue. That's just a couple of the highlights, and I'd be remiss not to allow my other colleagues to elaborate on the additionals.
You know, it's an extremely interesting conference. You have the governor there, you have legislative leaders, sitting down together, which is unique across the country. You had the staff from the legislative leaders talking about how they approach different issues, and it was, and we had a presentation on the Edmund Fitzgerald and the superstorm that they got caught in, and how modern weather forecasting might have prevented that, but I think some of the things that I took away were Matt Chase from the National Association of Counties gave a lot of insight into what's happening in Washington. And, his comment was when the whole approach from the Trump administration is that status quo is not an option, really, that they want to focus on outcomes and the federal level. Nothing is sacred. And they sort of flood the zone with different things and everything's on the table. But he also commented that, the order in Washington is sort of the White House, the courts, and then Congress, with Congress's role being diminished. And he went on to point out a few examples, but he said that they've got a 12-hour rule. They never respond to any press release coming out of the administration until 12 hours later, because there's likely to be iterations and changes and redirections. Sort of, I would liken it to when Lee Dreyfus was the governor and he had all of his trial balloons, just to put it up for different ideas and feedback. Matt also talked about $3 trillion has been invested in data centers over the last 2 years across the country. In Virginia, there are 300 to 400 new data centers, driving up electrical costs 30%. And the question is how will those fit into the conflicts between local control and the whole issue of data as a national security, part of the national security effort. So there's likely to be some of the debates that we're having here relative to wind and solar are taking place relative to data centers and the use of electricity and that. One of the other topics was transportation funding and the need for us to address the future funding of transportation. We went from a constitutional amendment prohibiting the rating of the transportation fund to a place where currently the general purpose revenues are funding transportation needs. And there's a need for a permanent funding source for transportation, and therefore efforts like the counties to advance that resolution. And finally, funding for SNAP. Wisconsin's one of 10 states where administration of the SNAP program is done at the county level, and with the federal cuts of cutting back 25% of the support, the counties were looking to the state to do that. There's a proposal before the legislature to make up that 25% and to provide additional staff to make sure that the error rate stays low and we continue to qualify for federal funding. But there were a lot of other things. Lance, or?
Yeah, Candace and I both attended. The only thing I would elaborate a little bit on, and it's within the agenda item that the chair put together, is really, it's not only just, it is an interesting conference, but what are the areas that you would be of interest in the future moving forward, particularly as the new board would come in for this committee? Just to build off the last point that John, one of the last points John made about data centers, backing up to renewable energy. Andy Phillips, one of the things he's going to talk about when he comes, that Chair Gibbs worked with him to get him to come here in March, is that local control, state control dynamic. What does that relationship look like? Where does the county have regulatory, do counties have regulatory authority? Stated differently, what tools are in your toolbox? And it's not only renewable energy, but it's also data centers and then battery energy storage systems, or BESSes. So that was not only a portion of what Mr. Chase talked about relative to NACO and kind of some of the dynamics, there, but certainly within the state of Wisconsin. And there's a lot of expansion for if you've seen in the news, relative to data centers, and then renewable energy continues to be a topic of concern, and how do you balance the local control with the state regulatory system. So I think that is an area, if I had to say, that that will take some bandwidth within the incoming board about how do you want to continue to address those issues. And I expect Attorney Phillips to elaborate on his presentation that he gave at the Counties Association when he does come here. Just one other piece that I'd add that I think, again, positions Marathon County well. As part of the Wisconsin Counties Association Conference, Candace and I sat through, before it starts, there's a county administrators and executives meeting where we talk about, it's a roundtable where we talk about what are issues we're dealing with. And the discussion around battery energy storage came up, and we're one of a handful of counties, certainly a minority of counties, that already have an existing ordinance. So we are in a better position to exert some form of influence over those developments should they move forward. So that said, we're also looking at how can we make our ordinance better. Kenosha County has what I believe to be a strong ordinance. Our staff are looking at that. What can we glean from it and what can we improve? But I think that area of how do you navigate the existing regulatory framework while also being ready to adapt should it change in those spaces of renewable or alternative energy, data center, and battery energy storage will be something that the full board has to ultimately wrestle with. Anything else, Candace, from, I think that was the only thing I had that I would add to what they discussed, other than the affordability stuff that is in the packet, which you hear a lot about.
Very good.
Yeah, last week, I was at a WCA board meeting, and we had a presentation by Rebecca Roker, which is also an attorney at the Atolis Law Firm, works with Andy Phillips. And they're talking about BESS and where we have authority to regulate, but there was a clear delineation between being able to regulate a project that's moving forward that's a standalone BESS versus a BESS that's included with a project that is going before PSC. So for example, if a BESS is included in a project that's a solar project that's being proposed and then the application goes to the PSC, our authority to regulate that is now circumvented by PSC. PSC now controls. So even though it gets very nuanced in what you can and can't do, you can regulate BESSes currently if they're a standalone system. But if they're part of a bigger project that's moving forward, that's being licensed by PSC, then the PSC controls on those. So it was very interesting. And one of the things that she presented was getting a little bit off topic, so I won't go down that road.
I was going to point that out. Well, you beat me to it. Any questions relative to it? All right. We will move on to sales tax revenue update.
It's in your packet. There's a 0% forecast change between where you were last year and where you're at right now. So what that means in light of your budget is if all goes consistent throughout the rest of the year, which I can guarantee it won't, but if it is, you'll have just north of $1 million pursuant to your rollover policy that would ultimately find its way into the capital improvement plan funding. So not inherently great news, not bad news, just news. It's consistent.
All right. Then next meeting is the 24th. We have a number of carryover items. We pretty much have set that agenda already. I know that the status of the Forensic Science Center, where we are with their budget, health insurance update will be on that agenda. We just ran out of agenda space this time, and we'll have another full meeting in a month, but trying to wrap up things with this session of the county board, as well as continue to provide information to make those policy decisions. Anything else that you'd like to see on those agendas? All right, if not, we will move on to item 9. Moved by Supervisor Hart, seconded by Chair Gibbs to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
All right.